Thank you. Okay, how many people have had to write an application that has some sort of GUI? Okay, good. So, what's the GUI challenge? Well, your challenge, of course, is maybe you have applications need to run on multiple platforms. And so Quad WC is great for Windows, but what about other platforms? So this is, when I was teaching myself the Dyalog GUI, this is a Mandelbrot set explorer that I wrote, and it wasn't that difficult. I used Quad WC, of course, and it was kind of fun. But when you move outside of the Windows domain, you're left with this kind of retro 1980s style character-based interface using Quad SM, and that won't quite cut it in today's world. So Dyalog's challenge is we want to try and provide the same functionality across whatever platforms we run Dyalog APL on, and we want to make it easy to use. And so we have different platforms, different technologies. Under Windows, you've got Win32, WPF, ActiveX. Under Mac, you've got Cocoa. Under Linux and Raspberry Pi, you've got Xwindow. And I tried to find out what they call it under Android, but they don't even, for what I can tell, they don't even have a name for the Android GUI framework, so I left it off. So here, today I'm going to talk about the HTMLRenderer. And it's a new GUI object. So you actually create it with Quad WC, which will run on all platforms. And here we're creating a new instance of an HTML renderer, and we're giving it a little string of some HTML. And you can see that over here we've got a bold and an italic tag, and so world is in bold and italic, and it just works. You can also give HTMLRenderer a URL parameter. And then you can, if you want to view the Dyalog website in your session, you can do that. But that's really useful for being able to pull up other resources. So it's available wherever Dyalog runs. So it's available on Win, Mac, and Linux now, Pi, soon, and Android is planned. And we want to try and make it as easy to use as Quad WC. How many people have used Quad WC? Okay, just about as many as have had developed GUI interfaces, so that makes sense. But we want to even try and make it even easier than Quad WC. So I want you to think of HTMLRenderer as a cross-platform replacement for Quad WC. And so Quad WC uses Win32, HTMLRenderer uses HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, just like you didn't have to learn the intricacies of Win32 to use Quad WC, we hope that you're not going to have to learn the intricacies of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to use HTMLRenderer. So all you need is a way to create your content. So you could roll your own, and indeed some of our customers have done so. I believe that in some of the Rumba work that Carlisle Group has done, they've got some HTML generation capabilities, and if Norbert is here, he can confirm that, or not. Or you could use what we're calling WCTU. And it's an interface between the HTML renderer and Dyalog's HTML creation library. And so our challenge, to reiterate, is to provide the same functionality across platforms, that's HTML renderer, and to make it easy to use, that's WCTU. So, WCTU in action. So here's a little form that's got a couple of text input fields, a date input, and a color input, and a submit button. And so you can fill in some information, select a date, select a color, click submit, and it displays a message down on the bottom here, and notice that the happy birthday message is in your favorite color. I don't want these nuances to be lost on people. So here's the code that runs that produces that form. And the first thing we do is we create a new instance of a WCTU page. So that's the page object. And we set its size, and then we create a form. And the form is going to contain some input fields. The field set is just that rectangular box that says, tell us about you. And inside the field set, we're going to add this thing called an input grid. Now, an input grid is actually a control that the tools group has built. And the input grid takes a list of labels and a set of inputs, and then arranges them in a grid. So we have a text input, another text input, a Syncfusion date picker, and a Syncfusion color picker. So we're now using resources outside of things that we've written at Dyalog. And we're adding a button that has submit on it. We're setting, for the click event, we're setting it to call a function called input demo callback. And we've added this div. A few years ago, I think it may have actually been 5 years ago, I was doing a MyServer presentation, and I said, okay, all you do is add a div, and Tony said, what's a div? And so a div is just a container in HTML parlance. And we're also adding a little bit of style. We're giving it a name or an ID of output, and we're giving it a little bit of styling to align, to center align the text. So now here's input demo callback, the callback function that gets called when you've clicked the submit button. So this is one of the lines from the construction, and you'll see that we gave each of the input fields a name, and here we're retrieving the value that was in those fields by their name. And when we set up the handler, for the click handler, we gave it input demo callback as the function name. And then when we set up our div to hold our output, we named it output, and down here, we're telling it to replace the contents of output with this message that we're constructing here. So I would make the claim that this is not substantially more difficult than using Quad WC. I'll leave it to you to tell me whether I'm right or not. So you can also run a MyServer MySite with HTMLRenderer. And so you can have the same content that runs on the internet or runs locally on a desktop, tablet, phone, JD's 75-inch TV. And you basically just tell it WC2 run and give it the path to the folder that contains your MySite content. However, we're not going to demo this today. Now, another thing you can do with HTMLRenderer is build standalone components. So one of the samples that we've built is a replacement for the Win32 control, the message box control. So you create a new message box, you give it a caption, you give it some sort of a style, and it uses the same styles as the Win32 message box. You give it some text. We tried to make all the arguments align so that the paradigm shift would be smooth. And then one of the things that you can do in this is you can give it as many buttons as you like and assign whatever text you want to them. And then you run it. And you get something that looks like that. And then when you click on one of the buttons, it returns the index of the button you clicked, or if you close the form without clicking a button, it returns a -1. So one of the things, if you look through the version 16 documentation, is it says experimental feature HTMLRenderer. And what I want to emphasize is that the HTMLRenderer itself is not experimental, okay? We expect it to continue to exist as it is with some backward compatible upgrades and bug fixes, but it's not going away. What is experimental are the tools and frameworks that we're developing to work with HTMLRenderer. And so we need to write additional documentation. We need real-life application of the tools, and really we need your feedback to help tell us whether we're on the right path or not. So please don't hold back, start using this. So if I were going to contrast WC2 and Quad WC, Quad WC remains a good choice, okay, if you're Windows only. Layout may be easier with WC2. There's no position or size. While you can add position and size to WC2 elements, in general you don't have to. So here's my Mandelbrot set GUI initial setup code, and you'll notice that I've got a lot of size. This is using Quad WC, and so I've got a lot of size and position. Actually, for every thing that I'm putting on my form, I need to tell it where it is and how big it is. And that level of detail goes away with WC2. Responsive layout is much easier, and Morton mentioned responsive layout and his frustration with airline apps in the earlier presentation. But what responsive layout means is adapting to different screen sizes and orientations. So you want your application to look good, whether it's running on a desktop, on a phone, on a tablet, on a refrigerator. Extensibility means adding additional components. And with Quad WC, you've got access to the multitude of .NET objects out there that you can incorporate and use. You can also write your own ActiveX controls. I've done it once. I did not enjoy the experience, but it is possible to do. WC2 has got several built-in components. We have the Syncfusion JavaScript tools. We've got jQuery, data table, Bootstrap, and there are a gazillion resources out there. If you do a search online for just about anything you might want to try and do, there will be an existing control or component to do that. I do want to mention, I think Morton mentioned this in his talk yesterday, that our Syncfusion license has been renewed for 5 years. So, and that, so we see that, Syncfusion will be a component of WC2 for the foreseeable future. Oh, and a gazillion equals a lot. And it's actually easy. It's kind of fun. And we'd really like you to join in and help build controls and share them. So now WC2 has got some catching up to do though, right? We need to add a lot more documentation, supporting materials, demos, tutorials. And in terms of reliability though, Quad WC has got a 25-year head start, and John Daintree. So that sets the bar pretty high. But WC2 has actually been around for over 3 years, and we use it all the time. So if you used the conference registration system to get here, and if you didn't, see Karen because you owe her some money. But that was written using WC2. So the future for HTML Renderer. Well, we believe that HTML, JavaScript, CSS are here to stay. And as such, HTML Renderer is here to stay. So if you want to develop GUI front ends for platforms other than Windows desktops, or even for Windows desktops, if you want to develop for Android, Linux, or Mac, if you want to deploy on tablets, phones, TVs, refrigerators, I guess there's a Samsung refrigerator now that's got a version of Linux running on it. You can link to your refrigerator and it'll tell you that you're low on milk when you're at the grocery store. And the whole Internet of Things. So this is a technology we think you're going to need to learn and embrace. So, and then help us guide you in what tools you need. So, anyone want to see a demo? Okay, cool. I intentionally put this. Yeah, if you said no, longer break. You guys blew it. Let's see. Okay, so bracket demo. SQL and Windows. Oops. It's the part where you have to type that the wheels always fall off the bus. Okay, so I'm going to start out with a clear workspace. So I want you to, there's nothing up my sleeves. And now I'm going to load the message box component that I showed a little bit ago. And if we wanted to look at it, it's got some built-in, some internal documentation. And this is kind of the style. I'm not going to go through the code in any great detail, but this is kind of the style for a standalone HTML renderer tool. We're adding some CSS and some interesting stuff. And we're going to roll out a number of different standalone components like this. And this is just the first. So we're going to create a new message box. We're going to set a caption. We're going to set some text. We're going to set a style. And then we'll set the text on some buttons. And then if we actually run it, so if I click the first button, it returns a 1. Okay, clear workspace again. Load WCTU, and we're going to initialize it. So this loads in a bunch of stuff. This loads in the HTML content generating framework. And now I'm going to fire up the input demo that we showed you earlier. And again, you can say, and actually the Syncfusion date picker is kind of neat, because if you click on the month, it gives you the year. If you click on the year, it gives you a decade. If you click on the decade, it gives you a bunch of decades. And if you go back to where I'm born, I can select 1961, February 23rd. Write that down. I'll expect birthday cards. My favorite color, I'm sorry, but I'm a blue guy. So next February 18th, or next February 23rd, my little tool here will wish me a happy birthday. And the code is exactly what I showed you earlier. So, and then this is the neat part. This is the one I wanted to save for last. So here I'm initializing WC2, but I'm pointing it at a particular directory in this case that contains some content, a little bit of JavaScript, a little bit of CSS. And I'm going to load this program called Cube. And if we edit Cube, basically what we're doing is we're creating a new WC2 page. We're setting its size. We're using a resource called jQuery, which is a very popular JavaScript library to make a bunch of things very easy. We're setting a title. We're adding a style sheet. And then we're just adding a bunch of divs. And the cool thing here is right here now we're able to, one of the things I've been talking about with the HTML generation tools is the ability to use APL to generate content. So here I'm assigning a bunch of classes, and I'm creating 6 divisions using each all at once. And then I'm adding each of those divisions to the cube division, and then assigning their content. And then I add a little JavaScript, and then I run it. And we wind up with something that looks like this. So we can do, right? Roger, what's the to rotate of that look like? Well, not what you'd think. So, and I have to pay a little homage to IBM documentation circa 1980. So some of you may get that. But wait, there's more. So here, I've got an Ubuntu virtual machine running on my system. And one of the things I was really tickled to find out is that the demo framework is built into RIDE. And I did not know that. You RIDE guys are just amazing. Thank you for your hard work. So again, start from a clear workspace. We're going to load the library. So I'm doing basically the exact same steps. As a matter of fact, this is a shared folder over on my Windows box. So I'm loading the exact same code that you just saw running under Windows. Same code. No, I don't want to change it. It's fine the way it is. And you have the same user, yeah, and you can display APL code just fine. You have the same user experience. Oops. So, well, that's it. Any questions?